Hello! I'm here in downtown Schenectady, in the oldest part of the city. It's the most historical part of the city. I'm here by the Cannon and Riverside Park. We're right by the Mohawk River. And I'm down here to ask you a question. Have you ever wondered what the first president of the United States had to do with Schenectady, if anything at all? Well, there's a lot I'd like to show you. And won't you come with me, because there's a lot to see right here under your nose. Let's begin in the classroom, and we're going to learn some basic information about George Washington, and then we're going to take a field trip to actual places he visited here in Schenectady. We will start our journey by asking a simple question about George Washington. Who was this man that is on our $1 bill and our quarters? Who was this man that we have been putting on our postage stamps for years? Who was this man that even foreign nations regard as a hero? Even New Albany's address is named after him, Washington Avenue in Albany. George Washington was born on February 22nd, 1732. He is one of the reasons we celebrate President's Day in February. He grew up in Virginia. That was one of the 13 original colonies. Here you can see a map of those 13 original colonies. And Virginia is shown in yellow just south of Pennsylvania, that's shown in the pink. I believe that to understand who the man George Washington was, it is important to first look at the generations prior to his birth. His great-grandfather, John Washington, was an immigrant at 23 years old from England to Virginia in 1656. This is a drawing of his actual home in Virginia. He married, had a family, and worked hard in his new homeland. John Washington was only 45 years old when he died, but he left hard work and wisdom for his future generations to inherit. One of John Washington's children was named Lawrence. He was educated in England and then returned to Virginia. He married and had a family on very important property in this colony. This important property was named Little Hunting Creek property. A house was built upon it that years later would become much larger. People from all around the world would come and visit this home almost 300 years later. Although Lawrence Washington was only 38 years old when he died, he would have a grandson who would be lovingly named after him. This grandson would change the name of Little Hunting Creek Plantation to the famous name that we know today. One of Lawrence's sons was named Augustine. Little Augustine was only 4 years old when his young father died at 38 years old. Yet little Augustine was to grow up and have a family of his own and a very famous son. This is a drawing of Augustine as a man. You can see he's wearing the typical clothing of a man at that time. He's wearing a tricorn hat and a cravat.
Okay, the word tricorn or tricorn with a silent E. This was the name of their hat. And tri means 3, and corn is corner. So that's why it was called a tricorn hat, because it had 3 corners. And then over here, we have the word for the tie, the big necktie that the men wore, cravat. And it's the wide piece of fabric worn by men around the neck. And it's interesting to see the similarity with the Italian word for necktie is cravatta, and the French cravate, and the Spanish corbata. So here you can see, to help you remember the word cravat.
When Augustine had children, he named one of them after his father Lawrence. This is his son Lawrence, and he was the one who changed the name of Little Hunting Creek Plantation to the name Mount Vernon. When Lawrence's mother died, his father remarried. He then got a new baby brother named George. When their father Augustine died at only 48 years old, George was 11. George then went to live with his big brother Lawrence. After his brother Lawrence died, George became the new owner of Mount Vernon. Mount Vernon is the famous home of George Washington. It is now a well-known tourist destination. George Washington married and raised children here, even though they weren't his own children. He loved Mount Vernon and always loved coming home to his plantation. One of the things that Mr. Washington loved so much was caring for and riding horses. Here you can see a painting of him on one of his favorites named Nelson. But more than that, Mr. Washington loved his wife Martha and her 2 living children. Martha was married before to a different man. He died, and she was left caring for their 2 living children. Now, Martha's new husband adopted them as his own and loved them very much.
Oh, George, won't you give me a big diamond gem? I want to ride horses, then cook you some hens. I want you in my lifetime to be more than just friends. So, oh, George, won't you give me a big diamond gem?
George and Martha did marry on January 6, 1759. In this painting of their wedding, you can even see her 2 children on the right-hand side in the front. Martha did travel to stay with George when he journeyed as a military general. However, she could not always be with him, and they missed each other.
Oh, George, won't you buy me a color TV? It's lonely in Virginia when you're in Schenectady. I work hard to maintain Mount Vernon when it's only me. So, oh, George, won't you buy me a color TV?
Now it's time to go on our field trip.
Here we are on Mumford Street at the Washington Irving Educational Center. And what you need to do is travel to State Street, which is a main street in Schenectady. You travel northwest, And the last street before this bridge is Washington Avenue. And we're going to turn right on Washington Avenue. And this is the area where there's a lot of buildings where George Washington had visited, and it leads right to the Mohawk River. Hi, here I am with Nelson, one of my favorite horses. We're at 58 Washington Avenue, and we're at the John Glenn House, and this was built around 1765, and they say that in this house I actually slept in a bedroom on the second floor. So come with me, I want to show you the other side of the house. Wait here, Nelson. Wait for me. Here we are on the other side of 58 Washington Avenue, and they say that here on the second floor that that's the bedroom that I stayed in, and you can see the window up there. But if you look to the left, you can see the brick outline that there used to be another window there, and maybe that was the window that I looked out of when I stayed here. Now, this is a private home. That means you cannot come up to the door and knock on it. It's not a museum and it's not for the public, but you can still come here and look from the outside. Now, what we're going to do is go across the street, because at that building, that house, that's someplace else that I visited. So come on. Come on, Nelson. Hello. Wait for me, Nelson. I can't get a good horse anywhere. Here we are at 43 Washington Avenue, right across the street from the prior house. And this is the Robert Sanders house that was built in 1750. Washington visited here in 1775, 1 year before the Declaration of Independence was signed. And here, it later became the Schenectady Female Academy, and for George Washington, what he did here, they say, is that he drank his tea. So here we are, we're still making our way down from Washington Avenue. Here I want to make a stop and show you the Schenectady County Historical Society. It's located at 32 Washington Avenue, and inside this building there are some wonderful treasures, and I want to share two with you. And this is open to the public. You can come down anytime you want to come see these treasures. Now, this is the front of the building, but the door does not work. So what you need to do to enter is to go around the side of the building. Okay, so here I am inside the Schenectady County Historical Society with the librarian, Mr. Mike Maloney. He agreed to share some information about one particular letter that they have here that is available for anyone to see when they make an appointment with him. So Mike, what is it that you have here?
So right here I have a letter from Jonathan Mix to Henry Glenn. Henry Glenn was the quartermaster during the American Revolution, and in the letter they're discussing in order from George Washington to cease the transportation and preparations of garrisons and any supplies to go out west of western New York.
Okay, well that's pretty exciting. Thank you. So here I'm standing in front of the second important artifact that I wanted to share with you. So Mike, what is it that you have here?
So this flag is a Sons of Liberty flag that was raised in Schenectady in 1771. Now the Sons of Liberty were an organization that was formed to kind of fight against British taxation and British representation in the government. And this flag has a little bit of a local bent because it wasn't specifically for, or it wasn't, the Sons of Liberty in Schenectady weren't specifically against British taxation, but they were against the British getting more land in Schenectady.
Interesting. It's beautiful. So people can come anytime the museum is open?
Yes, yes.
And
We're open 9 to 5 from Monday through Friday and 10 to 2 on Saturday.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm so glad you joined me. Here we are at the end of, oh, Nelson. Here we are at the end of Washington Avenue, and you're going to see this black metal fence. And on this fence is a metal sign, and it says that around 1786, John Baptist Van Epps was a fur trader and also operated a fleet of boats, a group of boats. At this site, he ran the ferry dock at which George Washington landed. I landed here on one of my visits to Schenectady. So although the docks are no longer here, you can see the area that he got off of his boat to come to Schenectady to check on his men.
To explain what a military genius Mr. Washington was, I want to explain about one situation of how he outsmarted the British soldiers. When fighting in Trenton, New Jersey, the British and Americans knew where each other's troops were situated. The British soldiers marched in the typical line fashion, and they outnumbered the Americans. The few American soldiers hid behind trees and bushes. The British did not know how to handle this type of fighting. The time came for both sides to go to sleep for the night. The British went to sleep and thought they would destroy the American soldiers the next day. So when it came time for the British troops to go to sleep, they did. And in the morning, the Americans had built big fires that night and left the area. When the British came upon those fires in the morning, they realized that the Americans escaped while they had been snoring. What? Where were they? I don't see them. George Washington was a very wise man, and people knew it. That's why they wanted him to have the honor of being our very first president. He did serve our country for 2 terms, from 1789 to 1797. Everyone wanted him for a 3rd term, but President Washington wanted to retire back at Mount Vernon. And he did, but for only 2 short years. Now it is time to discuss the beginning of the end. When we drink or eat, the epiglottis prevents food from going down the larynx into the lungs. When it becomes infected, it gets swollen, meaning fat. It would then make breathing very difficult. This is called epiglottitis. George Washington became sick with epiglottitis. He had difficulty breathing, swallowing, and talking. He said, "Doctor, I die hard, but I am not afraid to go." His body never healed from it, and George Washington died on December 14th, 1799, only 17 days before the new year and new century. Although George Washington outlived his most recent forefathers, he was still very young by today's standards. How old do you think he was when he died? 60? 70? 80? 90? He was only 67, but he lived a full life, serving his newborn country, serving his fellow citizen. Through his wisdom, there is one specific quote with which this great-grandson of an immigrant encourages us. Observe good faith and justice toward all nations. Cultivate peace and harmony with all. George Washington's great-grandfather once came to a new land to start a new life. And in that same new land, a new nation would be born by the hard work and determination of one of the sons in his future generations. Our hero, George Washington.